ask you a question before we talk about him. Have any of you ever been in a home where the adult, when you were young, maybe a teenager, where the adult figure in the home was nagging at you for something, like kind of getting on your case? Have any of you ever been in that situation? Let me ask a different question. Has anyone never been in a situation where some adult was nagging at you? Because I think at some point we all live with other people, and those adults in our lives want us to do things, and when we're teens, we might not want to.
Yes.
How many of you then became school shooters?
I didn't hear you. What did you say? Sorry.
I said, how many of you then, after someone nagged at you, became a school shooter?
Oh.
Because that's who we're looking at. We're looking at the person who shot the children in the Uvalde school. And he had probably really lousy things. From what I've read, he was bullied. He had a stutter that can be a really tough thing to deal with. He didn't do well in school. He had kind of dropped away from school. He lived with his grandparents. He had all kinds of stuff that was going on, right? But a lot of people do, and not everyone creates these kinds of tragedies, right? And so the question that I want to ask you, and we would do this in a group, but our time doesn't permit, is I want you to think, what things, events, situations, dispositions, anything you can think of, might have caused this young man to have committed this kind of a really horrific crime? What factors might have contributed? And I'm going to write a few of them down, and then we're going to talk about it from Bronfenbrenner's perspective. So everybody now on your own, because we're not going to take any more time in group just now, think of at least 3 things that might have caused or been a partial cause of him resulting in him being a school shooter. You can just think of this independently for the sake of time.
This is Kristen.
Yes,
Maybe.
just, don't
Okay.
say it just yet, though. Just let's let everyone think it through, and then. But did you have a different question?
No.
Okay, just hold off 1 minute, okay? Let's just let everyone get their ideas down. Okay, I'm guessing most of you have at least one thing written down, and let's start now with Kristen. What were you thinking? What's one thing, just name one thing that might have contributed to this outcome for this particular young man?
Just knowing that it exists in society.
Okay, really, that's a very interesting one. So knowing about the history of school shooters as a thing, at least here in this country, is that what you mean, sort of?
Yes.
Oh, very interesting. All right, recent knowledge of recent history. I guess I'm not writing it exactly well, but I'm going to put it that way. Recent history awareness. And we'll remember what we're talking about here. All right, and I'm going to just be calling on people at random. So I'm going to Felicia, one thing. Felicia? Moving to Bernice, one thing.
The anger and like resentment.
Okay, so he had never learned to cope with anger and resentment. And moving to Janelle here in the classroom.
I would probably say being like coming from a broken home and being abused.
Okay. Let's just put broken home. I'll just list one thing for now. And one thing from Hope.
Isolation.
All right, left alone, he had left school. What about Shinia, Shinia, that actually, are you here, Shinia?
Yeah, I'm here.
One thing that we might not have said.
Let's see here. I think something like, I guess not coping, maybe a bad environment that he lived in.
Did you say hoping initially?
No, like coping,
Oh,
like
coping.
just him living in like a bad environment or something like that.
Okay, so a possible bad home environment, and I'll add the abuse on here. Ethan,
For me, it's kind of similar to the recent history, like him kind of imitating what other people did because maybe they got some kind of attention after they did it.
oh, okay. Yeah, imitation and maybe like the attention they got.
Copycats.
Yeah. Who was that speaking? Thank you. Imitation due to attention. Okay, and now I'm just going to invite you to raise your hand so we don't get too many at once for something that we have that's not on this list. Yes, DeAndre.
Unidentified mental illness, something that the school or his guardians didn't catch.
Yeah, good. He maybe had something going on that was actually like an illness, something that he couldn't control happening in his brain. Something else that hasn't yet been said. I see Stephanie's hand.
I think I was gonna go with the mental illness as well with the chemical imbalance, but there's also lack of trust in adults.
Distrust of adults. Yeah. I see Richard's hand.
I was to say maybe alcohol and drugs were involved also.
There could be some drug use going on. Yeah, drug, alcohol use, we don't know, maybe. I don't see anyone in the room. Aaron, I saw your hand. Maybe I didn't.
Like a lack of conscience.
Yeah, a lot of self-doubt. A stutter is actually, you wouldn't think it would be a big deal, but it actually can be really significant for a person growing up because of the impact on the ability to communicate and often being victimized. So that could lead to a serious lack of confidence, and we might add a lack of hope, you know, even a lack of hope. And I see Shania's hand.
I was thinking maybe something bad was going on at school. Maybe he was being bullied.
Yeah, bullied. And that was evidently. Am I missing someone in the room? I bet you have something to say, Lorena.
Rejection
Rejection.
by like his peers.
When we get to studying, especially adolescents, we'll be talking more about the impact of ostracism and rejection. Terry Lynn?
Would like health issues or health problems be one of them?
Possibly, were you thinking of anything in particular?
Well, one was the mental health, but that one was called, but
Maybe his physical health prevented him from participating.
physical health, yeah.
Maybe so. Michaela?
Gun control?
Aha, access to guns. Right, if that hadn't been possible, you know, maybe he would have harmed one or two people, but not, you know, as many as he did. Am I missing anything from someone here in the room?
Would public safety measures be one?
Can you elaborate, please?
Like the security at school?
Yeah, just the fact that he could get in there. Yeah, that's part of the structure of the world he lived in that allowed him to get access to the school. Our Zoom got wonky here. Let me see if I can find the class again. Okay, there you are. All right, we have a pretty comprehensive list, and what I really like about it is that you have gotten at, I think, every one of Bronfenbrenner's levels. So now let's take a look at this situation through Bronfenbrenner's framework, and then we'll revisit those ideas and talk about them a little further. So Bronfenbrenner offers us a bioecological systems theory. You can think of bio referring to the physical body. He actually added that later. When he started his model, it was just the ecological systems theory. And you can think of ecology, an ecosystem, the interconnectedness of factors. It's not just one factor and not just in one direction. And it's a whole system of interactions. So let's go ahead and lay out this model just a little bit. So let's start with our individual right in the center. This is level 1. This is a person's biosystem. And we can think of the genes, things like genes, health, maybe anything that happened prenatally that harmed them, like maybe if they had anoxia or something like that. But anything like that. I'm trying to save space here over on the side because of the way I need to frame out the model. In fact, I'm going to just move our person over to the side to make sure I have enough room. I'm going to put him over here. So this represents the biosystem, and that is just the unique physical characteristics of the individual. And we talked about this. You guys came up with his health, and you came up with, I can't remember, but we'll take a look at it in a minute. So that's the very primary level of influence. But he aptly recognizes that that biosystem alone doesn't create us, and that every one of us lives within what he calls a microsystem. And the microsystem, as you already read it, are those direct influences and so by direct, we mean the factors that are interacting one-to-one with him. So for example, I mean, very clearly his parents or grandparents or whoever was raising him, right? His caregivers. These are in a person's microsystem. If he had siblings, those people are interacting directly with him. That's his microsystem, the most intimate world he lives in. We might consider his teachers to be part of his microsystem. They're interacting directly with him, or his neighbors. If they knew each other, they might not, but if they did, or maybe the people who go to the church.
Peers at school?
Pardon me?
His peers at school?
His peers. So whoever interacts or whatever interacts directly with him. And I would add in here a couple of unusual things. I would say that pets might be part of his microsystem. They can offer a lot of comfort, or conversely, if they're victimized in his environment, then they can be a source of modeling for victimization. And I would offer, maybe you do or don't agree, there's no necessarily right answer. I'm going to put it really tiny here because that's all I have. Social media or any kind of media. Because, it seems to me, I don't know if you guys would agree, but it seems to me that social media is almost like something that interacts directly with you. Does anyone want to counter that or comment on that idea that social media now is part of our microsystems for all of us? Especially younger people? I posit that it is.
I would agree.
Yeah, maybe, right? So we could say all of that is part of his microsystem. Now going on, we could say that he also lives, and I'm going to shape this level sort of like a building. It'll look kind of like a house. we can say that he also lives in sort of a structured world called the exosystem. I always think of the exoskeleton, and I think of this as like the skeleton of the world that he lives in. So and the exosystem, there are different ways of framing it, but I think the best way is to just shape it as the physical world or the structure of the world he lives in. I'm going to even add that word physical because I do often think of that way. And another way that it's often stated is the indirect influences. So, for example, we have his teacher as part of his microsystem, but his school is part of his exosystem. So the school maybe has certain values. Maybe they're really strict with kids or kind of punitive. You know, the school has an impact on him, but it's indirect. You know, it's not like someone talking to him, but the structure of the school is nevertheless impacting him. If it's very punitive, then he learns that school is a punitive environment. Sometimes, let's put a couple more like this. Let's say the neighborhood he lives in. We talked about his neighbors, if he interacts with them being part of his microsystem, but his neighborhood is part of his exosystem. So I don't know anything about that town in Texas, but maybe it's a really bad neighborhood and he can't go outside and play safely. And he's always learned to distrust people, anyone he sees on the street, and to be really defensive. I don't know. Or maybe he lives in a really rural area where he hardly ever sees people and he has to bike really far or something to visit anybody. I don't know. But that's part of the structure of the world he lives in. His parents' employers, you know, his grandparents or whatever. Let's put the employers of his parents. He doesn't interact with them, but if the employers are making his parents work hard all the time and work overtime, and, you know, they come home cranky and they don't have enough money, you know, that's part of his exosystem. The healthcare options. Someone suggested maybe he had an unidentified mental health condition. Maybe he has an unidentified mental health condition, but why is it unidentified? Is it because the healthcare system doesn't provide, they didn't have coverage, he couldn't get help, going to the doctor was pricey? Is that why, you know? Or maybe the doctor was so far away or overbooked, you know, you couldn't get in for an appointment. That's part of the structure of the world that he lives in. Anything else come to your mind that you think might fit into this category? Even if it's not related to him, but just that might fit in.
That culture around them.
Let's pause on that because culture is so important that it actually has its own level.
His community.
Okay, the community, is there a, you know, like a feeling of community? Or is it something where the neighbors don't even know each other? You know, when I lived up in Wisconsin, there was like a YMCA like a mile away, right? Place to get physical fitness, and you know, we were fortunate at that time, we could afford it. And so the kiddos had a place to like go swimming and, you know, do stuff like that, right? So the existence of features like that, right? Fitness centers, things like that. Maybe if he had had something like that, you know, we don't know. So that's all exosystem. And I drew it like a house because I think of it as structural. And we can always think of it being indirect. It's not like the child is interacting with the school and the school it's changing its policy, you know. In the microsystem, there's a little back and forth, right? Let's get a sort of a different color here for a sec here. In the microsystem, this child interacts with the parents, but it's two directional. If the child tends to be was a hard baby and tends to be a difficult, stubborn child, well, the parents are working to work with the child, but the child's reactions also impact the parents. It goes both ways. It's bi-directional. The siblings, older sister, say, impact this boy, but the boy also impacts the sister. Like, these aren't one way. And so you can tell microsystem because there's a two-directional thing going on. The interactions are direct, but in the exosystem, they're not direct. They're indirect. Like, the child lives in the neighborhood, but it's not like the child is impacting the neighborhood. And then, I mean, it's much less direct. So that's one way to distinguish. Now, in the middle there, he does put something actually called the mesosystem. And meso just means in the middle. And so I'm just going to use it as a series of arrows. So it is the interaction between and among other factors. And I always characterize it as, first off, the reciprocal relationship. So this is the little model. Here's our individual, right? Here's whatever the factor is. Whoops, excuse me. Here's one factor, here's another factor, and here is our individual. That's how I meant to draw that. Okay. So it's the interaction between factor 1 and factor 2 that are impacting the individual. So let's just take, for example, and imagine that this boy had a sibling, an older sibling, and that this older sibling was always getting into trouble. And so the parents or caregivers were always interacting with this older sibling. They were worried about this sibling, spending a lot of time with it. Every time the sibling was around, there was a lot of fighting, how that might be if there's an older sibling. So now here's our little guy who has a stutter, and he's coming home from school and he's getting picked on, and there's mom having a big fight with his big sister. Does the fact that mom and sister are fighting, does that impact our little guy? Yes, that's mesosystem. It impacts him. He doesn't talk to parents about what's going on. He goes to his room and plays video games instead, right? That is mesosystem. Between two microsystem factors, but also between, let's say, microsystem and a mesosystem factor. So let's just say, for example, it's hard to see here because we're getting smaller, but let me make this a little smaller. Let's make it bigger. Let me make it bigger for a minute, actually. All right, I'm going to draw a messy arrow here because I want to draw a relationship between school, which is exosystem, and parents, which is microsystem. So let's say the parents had bad experiences in the school. In general, when they were kids, the school was a place where they were always getting in trouble and it was bad. And so now their interactions with the school, they're always kind of complaining and they don't really support the school. If the school says there's a problem, they say, we don't believe you, leave our kid alone, like they're like that. So the parents have bad interactions with the school. Does that impact our child? It does. I mean, and let's flip it around. Let's say his parents are really important in the community and they're on the school board and they're friends with the principal and their interactions with the school are really good. Does that impact our child? Oh, sure. I mean, maybe he doesn't get called out when he needs to, who knows, right? That's mesosystem. That makes sense? I like to throw one more in here and take our pet and, I mean, whoever, the sibling and the pet, if the pet is badly treated by the parents or by the older people in the home, does that impact our child? I'd say yeah, because then the child might learn sort of cruelty or callousness or something like that. So there's two more system levels here. I know I'm going through this a little bit fast. I think it's a really important framework, so you might want to spend a little more time on it on your own. But let's go back to our blue and talk about macro system, and that is what Odonis, I think, right, mentioned a little while ago, culture. Yeah. So this is macro system. That was extreme. And let's just put culture. And often our culture is something we are completely unaware of until we leave it and go somewhere else. I don't think I even knew about my own culture till I moved to North Dakota. And then I realized that all kinds of things that I thought were true weren't true. They were relative. They were just specific to my particular culture. And I become very aware of my own culture by being with Navajo people. I become aware of how individualistically I was raised, you know, and how that leaves me, you know, having a certain, you know, being more alone than I think a lot of Navajo people are, right? Culture includes things like that. So, for example, in the dominant culture, which I think this young man was a part of, the culture includes maybe a competitiveness. You got to be on the top, the dominant culture, right? Maybe it includes a framework that says when you are 18, you move away. I don't know. I don't know anything about his culture, but maybe that's the dominant culture. There's a cultural value in this country, in the dominant culture, that says guns are okay. Are good. We should have them, we should use them. Dominant culture is kind of, you know, a little bit self-centered. Not all, not everybody, but that's the dominant culture. You know, act for yourself, act on your own behalf. I wrote me down. Anything else you can think of about the dominant culture in this country that we could include here?
Maybe a general indifference to violence.
Yeah, callousness, indifference to violence. Part of the dominant culture, right? Are there any values, if I drew a line here, that you would say are true of Navajo culture that might, you know, just to bring this home a little bit to where we are right here? For example, I've noticed a huge value on family responsibility here. Students chopping wood for their grandparents, driving 5 hours to take care of a family. I mean, I've noticed a huge value on family. Family first. Anything else that we might want to include?
And the clan system.
Clan, yeah. Family clan is an extension of family, it almost seems like, from my outsider perspective.
What about just the lack of like family love? I feel like between fathers to their sons, they kind of lack that love connection, I guess, versus a mom to her daughter.
Were you saying that in the Navajo culture, there's that lack of love, or I think I didn't understand you fully?
So like in the between the men, I think they're very minimal on sharing like feelings, like showing love. I feel it's that way with the men in our culture versus like moms with their daughters and grandkids.
Yeah.
That's like a
You
masculine.
know, if that's necessarily limited to Navajo, I noticed that even in my own, I even noticed that in my own relationship with my daughter versus my relationship with my sons. Yeah. So this culture definitely created a fertile soil for this to happen. If we assume that these things were true, he wasn't going to get a job and get out of the home. Maybe he's indifferent to violence. Maybe there's a value that guns are okay. Maybe it's a competitive place and he's losing, he's not doing well. And the last thing that we add is the chrono system, prefix chrono meaning time. It's almost like the idea of cohort. He was born in a particular time that is distinctive, that is different from his grandparents. What kind of time was he born into? He was born into a time with a lot of social media. Someone pointed out he was born into a time where there's a lot of awareness of school shooters. You know, I don't think this is ubiquitous a century ago. He was born into a time with a lot of political discard, a lot of fanning of the flames of hatred. What else might we add into the chrono system?
He was brought into a time where people value, they don't really value another person's life.
Perhaps a devaluation of life. I don't know if I can say that for sure, but maybe.
Maybe we can add desensitization, like the media we have, movies and all of that.
That's what I was gonna say. He's brought into this world where there's a lot of video game violence also. Well, entertainment.
Video game
The web access to the internet.
violence. Yeah, the access to the internet that leads people who have a predilection toward violence, leads people to more and more violent things. Like that's the nature of search engines and YouTube videos and things like that. So access to, let's say, the self-selection of really distorted viewpoints online. You don't have to write it down that way, but I'm talking about the online tendency for whatever you search out for them to give you more and more options to keep control of your attention. So this is the framework that Bronfenbrenner offers us. And you guys did a really fine job, actually, one of the best I've seen in the years that I've taught this, of identifying a whole bunch of things within all of these levels. Broken home, where would you put that? What level? Micro. This is micro.
Micro.
Yeah. Where would you put something like, we already talked about access to guns. Where would you put health? Yeah, bio probably. Where would you put this public safety thing, the fact that he could get into the school? Where would you put that one? I'd say exo,
The
yeah.
exosystem.
Yeah. You guys did a really good job with that. So this is the kind of thing that we think about as an overarching framework for developmental psychology. And we're already well over our time frame here. Let me just think for a minute, because I want to make sure we get enough time for everything. So I'm going to do a very quick little overview of both Erikson and Piaget